It's so interesting with something like vegetable stock. I think there's this popular belief out there that there's some mystical recipe to get it right, but it's actually super simple to put together. And again, there doesn't need to be anything complicated about that. I get it. A while ago, I was in that same camp. I thought there was some super secret way to make vegetable stock. And then when I looked into it and did it myself, I realized how simple and easy it was. And then from that point, I never looked back. Particularly this year, one of the things that I made a promise to myself to do was to be as waste-free as possible. And food waste for me was something that I wasn't necessarily focused on when I was learning to cook. But I think as I've gone more plant-based, I, like many, have learned about the environmental and sustainability impacts that food can have. So for me, to get the most out of my food is my way of taking part in those discussions. So I've been really focusing this year on getting my food waste down to as close to zero as possible. And one of the tricks to do that is actually making stocks of leftover scraps of veggies. Now today we're just going over a simple way to do it, and I'll go over some of the examples of foods you can use. So the best place to start for my stocks are usually some leftover scraps of onions and garlic. Like most other dishes, they're gonna be the base of building that flavor in the stock. Now I'm not doing this today, but if you want, feel free to roast a head of garlic and then put it in your stock. That'll definitely add a richness and depth to the stock. But obviously, if you're trying to keep this as simple as possible, you can skip that step. Next is root vegetables. Really, all kinds of these are fantastic for stocks. So things like the ends of celery, carrots, parsnips, the list goes on, but these are all fantastic bases for stocks. Other things that I like to throw into stocks are actually the harder stems of herbs that I use. So for example, this time I have a bunch of leftover parsley stems. So instead of just getting rid of them and getting nothing out of them, we could extract some of that nutrition out of it by adding it to our stock pot. From here, you can add more spices and herbs depending on what you have and what you want to add. So for example, today I'm adding a couple bay leaves, a little bit of seaweed to boost some of that mineral content, and some fenugreek seeds. Now again, these are not necessary. They can be omitted. They can be swapped out for other things. It's really all going to be a product of what you have. You can also add things like whole peppercorns to add some of a peppery flavor. You can add salt to your vegetable stock if you want. Personally, I suggest not doing that. The reason being is I don't know when I'm going to use this vegetable stock or what I'm going to use it for. So if I'm going to add seasoning, I'll add it when I actually use it for cooking. Speaking of spices, I wouldn't use very strong ones like curry powder or something like fresh ginger. These flavors are very overt and overpowering. So unless you want that to be the flavor of your stock, you probably don't want to be using them. From a health standpoint, vegetable stock is fantastic because you're able to extract more nutrients out of these odds and ends of different vegetables that you wouldn't be eating anyway. So for me, I think it's a great way to get the most out of the food you're buying, and it doesn't have any extra cost to you because you're buying the food anyway. In fact, it's a great way to save money because on top of that, you're not buying pre-made stock. And I know when I go to the store, a lot of pre-made stocks have added sugars or salts, which maybe I don't necessarily want. And for me, learning to put these stocks together has saved me a ton of money on its own. It also can be super nutritious because you're adding all these different veggies together and those nutrients are going to diffuse into the water, which is kind of the point. That's the whole point of what's going on in the stock. So we're able to create these kind of combinations of flavors and nutrients that you really can't find other than in the leftover water, which becomes our vegetable stock. Now in terms of cook time, this is going to take, I'd say, at least 2 to 4 hours. So basically we're gonna fill our stock pot up about halfway to 2/3 way with water. We're gonna add all our vegetable odds and ends, bring it to a boil, and then cook it down for, again, at least 2 to 4 hours. For the majority of time that I'm cooking it, I like to cover it and then let it simmer so too much water doesn't evaporate. You can add water as you go, but it is going to dilute the solution, so something to keep in mind. And alternatively, if you have a crock pot, this could be as simple as throwing all your odds and ends into that pot, covering it all with water, and then setting a timer for 8+ hours, and it could be as simple as that. Now once that's all done, we're basically going to strain the liquid, and then now finally we can discard the odds and ends of our foods, but we retain the stock. And then from there you could put it into whatever containers you want, and then you could freeze some, you could use it later today, use it as the base of a soup, cook grains in it. There's tons and tons of different uses for stock. So I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial. This was one that was requested, so I'm happy to put it together, and hopefully this helps demystify the myths that surround making a stock. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next week.